Hi, Vicky.
Hi, Shane.
Have you ever created anything professionally or just for kicks for public consumption? I had a hard time kind of explaining this. So something like think about it like something for outreach or public outreach or something like
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah, I have. I've done quite a few art fairs, and I was in charge of like the educational programming at the art fairs. So
Oh,
yeah, so I would work with artists and design all sorts of stuff, like from activities for kids up to just like public engagement activities. Like we did yoga in the art galleries, and we
oh,
did
very
some,
cool.
yeah, and we did some like educational stuff for artists, like about their craft and businesses and stuff. So that was really, I love doing stuff like that, actually. Yeah. So what
Oh,
about you? I
that's super
assume you've
neat.
done a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, these days I mean, podcast aside, obviously, I'm more behind the scenes helping the folks that do the thing.
Yeah.
But before AGU, I was a fellow at the National Academies, and I worked in their museum that they had in the time in DC.
Ooh.
And I actually created this game that I called, I think it was Eco Blocks. This was a while ago.
Mhm.
But the idea was to demonstrate environmental resilience. So basically, if something happens in an environment, how long does it take to bounce back for
Mhm.
different things like fire or hurricanes or different stuff. And it was basically, it was kind of roughly based on Jenga. And
Oh.
so I remember there was a die, and you like rolled the die, and each block had a different number associated with it. And each block was also associated with a different hazard. So if it was like a hurricane, it was harder to move a block than say fire or something like that. I don't know. But
Oh.
I'd love to go back. Actually, this remind me. I'm going to go back and try to find it. But I
Yeah.
have to say, it was honestly one of the more creative things I've done professionally, and that's saying something considering we are here right now.
Right.
It was an absolute blast.
That's really, really cool. But I have to be honest that I heard you say Jenga, but it translated into my brain as Jumanji.
That's the next one, Vicky. I'm going
Yeah.
to do one based on Jumanji.
Oh my gosh.
Science is fascinating. But don't just take my word for it. Join us as we hear stories from scientists for everyone. I'm Shane Hanlon.
And I'm Vicky Thompson.
And this is Third Pod from the Sun. All right, so it's day 5, the final day of
Ooh.
our special series from our annual meeting. And the theme of today is open science.
Ooh, open science. Tell me more. What is open science?
That's a great question. It's it's a lot of things.
Yeah.
But basically, in the way I'm going to frame it, it's the idea that information, data, etc., should be free, accessible, and available to all.
Yeah, that sounds pretty great.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And our interview today comes from someone who's using and making available open data to create some really amazing stuff.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
Ved Chirayath, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Laura. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about the game. What's the objective? Because that's always the first question you have to ask with a game.
Yes, so the objective with NemoNet is nothing short of mapping the entire ocean floor.
Oh, that seems reasonable.
Drop in the bucket.
Yeah. How long is that?
Easy.
How long is that going to take?
If we just used about 1,000 PhD scientists, it would take 3 million years by our estimates.
Okay.
So we're trying to accelerate that a little bit with citizen scientists and lots of supercomputing power.
Nice. So how do you play?
So you play by starting off on a research vessel, digital research vessel that looks nicer than any actual research vessel I've been on in the open seas. At NASA invented an instrument called fluid cam and fluid lensing, and that instrument's the first that has given us a diver scale view of the underwater environment in 3D at like the centimeter scale. So we were mapping all these areas with aircraft, with drones. Eventually we're trying to get to satellite layers. And as of now, we've mapped about 6% of the seafloor. In the game, your job is to help us interpret all of that data. So we create a map of a coral reef, and it's really complex, even for experts to look at. If you go to the Amazon rainforest and you look at 1 square meter, there's maybe 10 species that are there. In a coral reef, it's easily 100 times that.
Whoa.
In that same area. So for a supercomputer and artificial intelligence to classify that, it's getting better and better at tasks, but there are certain ones that are just still very difficult. If you Google blueberry muffin in Chihuahua, or a sheepdog and a mop, you'll find all these examples where AI is failing. It's not giving a really good result. And that's because it's not really at the level of even a 2 to 3 year old. So what we do in the game is have users give us all of that contextual knowledge, basically train our AI using their brains. There are 8 billion supercomputers walking around this planet, and each one of them can make a contribution. And that's really what the game's about, is to get them in the game, looking at coral, slowly but surely learning the different types of coral, and then helping train our supercomputer how to classify it autonomously.
Okay, so you're looking at the coral. Are you also looking at the species that are there? Not just the coral species, but like fish and all that too?
So right now we're starting primarily with just shallow marine habitats. So in addition to coral, we're looking at seagrass, meadows, even bare sand and substratum. There's lots of different categories. As NemoNet is expanding, we're trying to, people are getting more ambitious. They would like us to, with the newest version of our instrument, we can actually detect fish and large, charismatic megafauna, so sharkies, sea turtles, things like that.
Do we consider sharks charismatic?
I think they're very charismatic and sweet. They have a lot of personality.
Yeah.
I've spent a lot of time with sharks. I was terrified of sharks growing up, but one of the things that we hope the game accomplishes is that for a lot of folks that don't have access to the water or physically not able to get to the water, it gives them that perspective, right? When you go to a national park and a rainforest, you're immersed in that environment. You really connect with it. And with water, I think one of the biggest challenges to conservation is just getting people there, getting them to see what it's like. There's lots of gear. Diving is not for everybody.
Right.
Sharks, things like that. It can be putting off. And the ocean is a dangerous place, just like any forest is. But if you can get them to empathize, to see a coral reef, to start learning kind of its ins and outs and the creatures that live there, you create a kind of a grassroots conservation effort. That's what we had on land. And that's why I think land resources are almost better protected than what we have in the ocean.
I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn that we have actually mapped more of the moon and more of Mars than we have of our own planet because of the oceans and because they have, prior to fairly recently, been considered fairly impenetrable for mapping purposes.
Impenetrable, and this endless resource, which now we're beginning to understand is quite finite. Just to give listeners perspective, we've lost entire jet planes in the ocean that have not been recovered for 10 plus years. On Mars, we lost a rover the size of a golf cart, and within 1 week we had a satellite image of the crash site. We had a satellite image of the parachute. That's the level of technical mismatch there is between what we can do in the outermost planets and our own homeworld.
So mapping the ocean, this is a big challenge. Doing it, what's the scale of the game? Because it seems that doing it, centimeter by centimeter is going to take a while.
It will. And there's different ways of mapping the ocean, right? There are very good acoustic maps already of the ocean. This is what ships use to navigate, so they make
Sonar
sure they don't hit a seamount, right? Sonar, and you can find vessels like, the Titanic was found first through a sonar survey by one of my colleagues, Bob Ballard. But those technologies, they give you a very coarse view, right? It's like looking at trees and just looking at their shape, at very chunky shapes.
So if you haven't put your glasses on in the morning when you get out, as someone who's nearsighted, I get out of bed and I'm like, that's the door over there. I can tell you what the color is. I can't tell you the outline or anything like
general
that.
Shapes, really general shapes. And so as a result, our knowledge of those ecosystems is equally impaired. We've, with acoustic systems, have mapped quite a bit of the ocean floor. We still lose entire jet planes, so it's not like we have even really fully mapped it with sonar. But the way that we on land have done it for more than 60 years at this point is multispectral remote sensing. So this is using light, it's particularly the visible wavelengths of light, to study the different properties of an object. And with multispectral remote sensing, we can look at one of these things and I can tell you, for example, this is synthetic and not in fact real, because its multispectral reflectance is different. Whereas if you look at that with a sonar, it actually looks exactly like a real plant, right? There's no acoustic difference. So that's why we are spending so much time looking at mapping the seafloor the same way we do land.
If people are asking, what is the importance of mapping the entire seafloor? What is aside from these species, why is it important for us to have done the kind of mapping work with Earth that we have done on Mars and the Moon? Like, what's the value in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing short of our survival. One of the predictions I made, and we got a lot of flack for it at the time, was when we released NemoNet and people said, well, this is in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic. Why should we care about preserving coral reefs in the middle of this? And I said, listen, I guarantee you the next drug to treat COVID is likely going to come out of one of these reef systems. And sure enough, 6 months later, a drug 30 times more effective than remdesivir came out of a sea squirt in one of the reefs that we mapped. And that's an environment that species may have gone extinct in the next couple of years if we had not provided habitat maps to say, look, there is biodiversity here. And with that comes, with corals in particular, they have they're sort of the 21st century medicine cabinet. They have all of these advanced compounds to fight disease, to fight viral compounds. Parasites, because they're sessile, right? They don't really move that fast. They actually do move on short time scales, but it's all chemical and biological warfare. And so if you're looking for drugs just for the first thing, this is where it's at. This is where you're going to find most of the medicines to treat ailments that affect humans. It's not just COVID that was treated with reef systems. The leading blood pressure medications came out of corals, cancer compounds. The list goes on, and that's just corals. Corals support, on top of that, all of these other organisms in the ocean, which also provide these compounds. Sharks have amazing abilities to fight cancer, among other diseases. And so that's one component of why should you care? Well, if there's another pandemic, which I'm nearly certain there will be, we're going to rely on this medicine cabinet to treat us ourselves. And if we, on our watch, let that biodiversity putter out that's evolved for billions of years, we lose with it the potential to treat ailments that will affect our species. Of all the species on the planet, humans are some of the least diverse, despite however much differences we try to create amongst ourselves. We're genetically almost identical. It's scary. And so as a result, when a pathogen does emerge, it tends to wipe out large swaths of the population very quickly.
And is this information that is coming out of the game available to all the scientists and other people who might be interested in getting access to it?
We've got 85-year-old, playing it who's super into it, and she can outperform me regularly. So I've sort of given up. I'm like the lower tier level as you rank up in the video game. There's the whale shark as the top level. So there's a couple of our whale sharks, and then you start off as a plankton, very small.
I love it. If somebody wanted to get involved with this, how would they go about doing it? How would they become a plankton first and then hopefully a whale shark?
Yeah, I mean, just go to nemonet.info or just type in NASA NemoNet and download it. It's available for Windows, Android, iOS devices. We tried to make it as universal as possible. We're working with some bigger agencies to make it like a more professional tool for them to use to classify, but all the data will remain open source. And then you start up the game, you get a profile. I think mine's like Sir Captain Narwhal or something. You can get some auto-generated ones, and then you can compete with different friends and family members. So that's some of our best outcomes, or when people get competitive.
How do you think your block game stacks up to what Ved is creating?
Okay, so I'm proud of what I've done, but it doesn't. And that's fine. I'm so happy that there are folks out there like Ved doing the work that they're doing. And so with that, that's the last of our episodes in a special series. And that is all from Third Pod from the Sun.
Special thanks to Laura Krantz for conducting the interview, and to you, Shane, for producing this episode and all our episodes this week. Audio engineering was by Collin Warren, with artwork by Olivia Ambrogio.
If you'd like to see a video for at least part of this interview, you can head over to YouTube and search for AGU TV.
We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please rate and review the podcast, and you can find new episodes in your favorite podcasting app or at thirdpodfromthesun.com.
Thanks all, and we'll see you next week.